First thing I notice in the casino is the noise. The sound of bells, cheers, constant chatter, and even the distant sound of the one-armed bandits spinning. In most other circumstances, it would have seemed like a normal casino. Except in this casino, there was almost no one around. The pontoon table had the dealer and two players. There was a fortune wheel that had four people sitting around it, and there was a single bored man at the front of the casino. The man saw us and he approached us. He was dressed in a worn-down red and orange suit with golden buttons. He saw the six of us as he pulled out six different gray chips as he handed one to each of us, as he explained briefly the rules of the casino. You need something of value to gamble in this casino. Since you're coming from the streets of Vanderburg, the only thing you have of value is your own lives, your own freedom. There are prices made to be paid for our many fabulous prizes. Even our grandest prize, the entrance to Morris's mine, it is valued at five of these chips per person, the docent said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I could see underneath his shirt collar is an electric collar, similar to those used on prisoners and gladiators. Thank you, everyone said to the docent as six chips were handed out, and Marceline pocketed both hers and her sister's chips as we looked over the many different tables and games that there were to play. We need to get the chips as quickly as possible. Odds favor the house, and the longer we play, the more likely we are to lose, I said while everyone awkwardly nodded, but Kel decided to correct me. Well, every game will favor the house, but we shouldn't make any rushed choices and try to win the games that we have the best chances at. If we play cautiously, we might take longer, but at least we'll be able to play more. Maybe we can go to the counter and exchange this chip for multiples of smaller varieties. That way we can take a loss if it happens, but we can also can win, he recommended while everyone nodded, but I sighed. Again, Kel trying to do things the safe and logical way. When will he learn that we can't not beat this casino by being logical? You go do that. I'm going to try and win a game of pontoon, I said while Marceline tried to get me to stop. Autumn, you're going to walk right into a trap. Kel is right, and we should listen, she said before I raised my hand to silence her. Just because you and Kel were right about the countryside and the radio station does not mean that you'll be right here. These stories require an understanding of the esoteric and folklore of the Fae, and quite frankly, both you and Kel are as exoteric as they come. There's no way you would understand how any of these tests are supposed to work, I told Marceline, who clenched her hands into fists before letting out a sharp exhale, and she turned to leave. Kel, Fallen, Grace, and Dylan all following her. Summer stood by me the entire time. You do realize that was extremely rude to them both, right? Summer asked me, and I shook my head. It isn't rude if it's true. Marceline has a special book and some practice. Learning magic doesn't make someone magical. You have to be born into it, or at least raised into it. Dylan has an inherited magical artifact, and that's it. Without it, he's a dead man. And Kel is even less special than both of them put together. Why did you invite him? I asked Summer, who turned to face me at the same time I turned to face her. I didn't invite him. I thought you invited him, she asked as we both thought about it for a second. Well, either way, none of them were born special, so it doesn't matter. They don't understand this world the way you and I do. Just because they got lucky a few times doesn't mean that they understand this. They should stop trying to lead and leave it to the magical experts, like you and me, told Summer, who crossed her arms. What about Falling Grace? She was also born into this, and you're not treating her any better. Hell, you wouldn't have even known about the pumpkin house if she didn't tell you. You weren't exactly born into magic either, Summer said while I turned away from her. I hate to admit it, but she was right. I was not born into magic. I was just the unlucky human baby that was swapped out for a changeling. The same changeling who was standing across from me. She got to be the lucky child, raised by humans with the powers and abilities of a fae. I was an unlucky human raised by fae with no abilities to speak of. I was raised with strange rules, stories of magic, and stories about why people deserve to be punished and how much birthright meant. I meant something because I was part of the Argentum family, only to realize I wasn't a biological part of that family, and that one of the other families had the actual Fae part of that family. I gained a sister, but ever since then, I know everyone is talking behind my back about how I had nothing special about me. No magic, no blood, no connection to the Fae, other than my knowledge. So here I was trying to use my knowledge to help us forward through the pumpkin house, and I had nothing to offer anyone. I bet they were talking about how useless I was to each other, but I was certain that I was right. I had to be right here. I made my way over to the pontoon table where the dealer was wearing a mirrored angel's mask. The other two players looked exhausted and defeated, their haggard faces barely glazed over the table and their cards, as I sat down with Summer by my side. You need to avoid playing this game. I'm going to win more than my chips worth here, and it depends a lot on you not playing this game at all. I warned her as she nodded, standing next to me, as I placed my great chip down on the table while the dealer glanced my way. Their expression was inscrutable, while the other players woke up a bit to see what I did. So they also placed a single gray chip into the pool, while the dealer offered the same. If this is your only chip, do know that if you lose, that you will lose your freedom now owing it to the casino. Do you realize this? The masked angel dealer asked. I could see on their back broken bones sticking out of the rack, where their wings used to be. The only remaining evidence of their divinity was the mask that had reflected myself and my sister in the face. I nodded. I am aware, and it is the only thing I have to gamble, so please, let me gamble with it, I told the dealer, who tensed for a moment before nodding. 4 gray chips being bet on while they shuffled all of the decks together. In casinos like this, it was more common to shuffle 4 or even 8 decks together to avoid card counting or other means of cheating. A standard deck of cards has over 8 times 10 to the power of 67 variations, more variations than stars in the galaxy. 8 decks shuffled together, 3 times 10 to the power of 910. More variations than atoms in 10 different universes. So card counting or other means of cheating were not possible. Not with the angel looking over me, and not with other invisible means of keeping me from cheating. The only way to win is fairly, and the casino made it virtually impossible to win fairly at all. So the trick with games like this is not to merely play the cards, but to also play the other players as well. The cards were dealt out, with my card being dealt first. The other two players were then dealt, then the dealer played his first card face up, a jack of spades. Massive advantage towards the dealer, especially with my own cards. A 2 of hearts and a 2 of diamonds. I signaled to the dealer to give me an extra card, and he dealt me a 5. The other two players laid their cards down on the table, so now I only had 9, and I had to get to 21, or at least as close as I could without going over. I signaled for another card, and I was dealt an ace of spades, and I laid my cards down, face down. The value of the cards were 20. It was close enough to 21, and I wasn't going to risk another ace to get a perfect 21. Taking an unnecessary statistical risk was a terrible way to play. All I could do was hope that no one else had 21. The dealer flipped over his hidden card. It was a 5 of hearts. He only had 15, and the other players flipped it over. One had an 18, and the other had 19. The one who had 19 was clearly quite happy with it. However, then I flipped my own cards over, showing that I had 20. All 4 chips were pushed my way, and I grabbed one chip and I laid it on the card dealer's side. "Here you go, a tip for such a great game," I told them, and even with a covered face, there was hesitation, their electric collar underneath their shirts barely visible as their hands gently brushed the gray chip, like it would turn to smoke if they touched it. Giving tips to the card dealer is a common courtesy. However, such a large tip, one that represented freedom, was something that was practically never done. I had essentially given the card dealer their freedom, and with no way to see their face, all I could do was hope that my message was clear. Playing the players is a skill that is easily overlooked, but it is hard to remember that the house is playing the game also. But in games like this, the house is represented by a player that can be bluffed, persuaded, or even bribed. Following the conventions of the casino, all I did was give a tip to the dealer. A tip so large that he cannot ignore it. The value isn't in money, but in the dealer's freedom. How many times has this angel watched people make bad choices? How many bad choices did this angel make to end up where they were? How many selfish people gambled away their freedom, some winning, but most losing, never considering for a moment that the dealer was also a person, never considering the fact that they are trying to win blood, life, and even freedom from the dealer. How many times did the dealer watch their value of the freedom gambled on? Dozens, hundreds, thousands, or even millions of times? How often did someone show the fallen angel enough kindness to free them? Or did they see them imprisoned at the table and figured the punishment had to be just because they were clearly a fallen angel? When you're seen as a monster, people will assume any cruelty directed towards you is just and fair. Though odds are most of the players didn't even consider that much. They just saw their cards, and they tried to win more than they lost, only winning enough to keep playing and to gamble again. The only way to win is to know when to quit, but I couldn't quit yet. The angel took the chip from me, slipping it into their pocket. "Can we play again?" I asked, and they nodded, as I slid 2 gray chips forward, pocketing the last one into my pocket. The card dealer slid 2 chips forward, and the other players muttered, but they slid all their chips forward. Now the last of their chips and their freedom on the line. But the invisible hooks in their mind pulled them forward. They won games before, and they are convinced they just need to gamble more to win more. I did not feel as sympathetic to the players as I did to the angel dealer. The card dealer was a fallen angel, someone worth sympathizing with, who likely had a tragic reason for being stuck here, especially for being such a powerful being. The players, they were only human. They made their choices to be here. Whatever happened to them was because of their own choices. No one made them come here. No one made them gamble. They could choose to walk away at any time. They would get their lesson soon enough about gambling. Sooner or later, they would be punished, and all I can hope is that they were punished by me. The dealer dealt himself a king of hearts. The card I dealt with had five of spades and an ace of spades. I signaled to be dealt another card, and sure enough, I was dealt a seven of diamonds. 13. It was far from perfect, but I would need to be dealt another card. I signaled for another card, and I was dealt a six of clubs. 19. It would have to do. I looked up from my cards. The other players also signaled for new cards, but seeing the way their shoulders slumped, they probably went over 21. I looked over at the dealer, who then dealt themselves another card. A nine of clubs. It was odd they dealt themselves another card. It would leave a high probability of losing. I smiled as I laid my hand face down on the table. My intent was clear to the dealer with my tip. I just gave them back their freedom. I would be guaranteed my own freedom. After all, if I just gave the dealer their freedom, surely they wouldn't want anything wrong to happen to me. That was how stories like this happened. I give someone their freedom, and so they help me keep mine. Our cards are flipped over, and my heart sinks. The other players are over 21, and I have a 19. However, the hidden card of the dealer, a two of diamonds. They had a perfect 21. They collected the chips, and the other players went pale as some mean-looking men tapped them on their shoulders and escorted them away from the table. Two of my gray chips are taken, leaving only the last chip in my pocket as the fallen angel took the others away to put back to the house. Why did that happen? I thought I played the game right, I asked Summer, who whispered back to me. They aren't under any obligation to give you special treatment. Even if you do something kind for someone else, doesn't mean they'll be kind back. Some people can receive all the compassion in the world, and they will only ever know greed in their heart. Sure, you gave them their freedom, but that doesn't mean that they'll want to make sure you keep yours. You don't have anything to offer them, so to the dealer, you're just another player. That's okay, because it isn't an indication of your character, it's an indication of theirs. You would give them freedom, but they would willingly snatch yours away. Summer whispered to me while I shook my head. That doesn't make sense. Only humans are supposed to be selfish. Everyone else is supposed to be fair and good. I played fair. I did something good, so something good was supposed to happen to me. I whispered back while Summer shook her head. You did good, but anyone can be fair or unfair. Being human has nothing to do with that. You did something good, they did their job. Now you know the kind of person that they are. Use that to your advantage, Summer said to me, only for me to shake my head again as I took my last chip out, staring at it for a moment before I whispered to myself, if I knew the dealer was going to do that, I would have never given them their freedom. I said as I placed the chip down. When I did that, I saw tension in Summer's eyes, her hand on my shoulder squeezing a bit too hard for just a moment before she let go of me. You got this. Just remember to play the game. Don't expect kindness nor favoritism, she said as I focused on the cards, tears just behind my eyes as I looked at the cards dealt to me and the dealer. They didn't act the way they were supposed to. These kinds of stories were always about someone doing something nice to get something nice in return. That was always what happened in these stories. So, if that wasn't what was happening here, then, oh, it had to have been me. The dealer was esoteric, supernatural, a being of higher ethics than I could ever hope to understand. I must have done something wrong. Of course. It was so clear now. They were dealing with higher ethics, and clearly I fell short of the correct expectation, so they took my chips as punishment. Maybe it was because I was expecting kindness instead of freely giving it away. Of course, since I was expecting something in exchange for giving something, that meant it wasn't truly a kindness. So clearly, I deserved to be punished for breaking an invisible rule that no one else could see but the angel in front of me. My cards were lucky again. A 10 of hearts and an ace of diamonds. A perfect 21. In any other circumstance, I would double down, but I only had my own freedom to gamble with. Although I was tempted to ask Summer for hers, I couldn't ask my sister to give up her own freedom to boost what I was going to gain. It wasn't right. She was Fae and I was human. I had to earn my own way through the pumpkin house. I laid my cards down as the dealer flipped over his cards. Perfect 20. I flipped over my cards and he slid over another gray chip my way. Even though it was twice what I had just a moment ago, it felt hollow, like a bitter salve that was meant to ease the burn of losing the two. I had 4 gray chips for a moment, just enough to earn my way into Morris's mind, and now here I was, trudging through the games to try and earn my way out again. But before I had a chance to gamble again, the angel dealer lifted their hand. "I'm heading to break. Try a different game," they said as they quietly left, and I was left at the table, just me and Summer. "This is going to take forever," I said, pocketing both of my chips as I looked around the casino, trying to see what other games I could play. I could see the others trying their hand at penny arcade games and low-stake games, trying to earn their way slowly but safely. It could take hours or even days if it happens at all. "What games can we earn a lot of chips quickly?" I asked Summer, who pointed at a triple fortune wheel. Most fortune wheels in the 7 cities have 38 slots, numbering from 00 to 37. They're supposed to be perfectly balanced, so all have an equal chance to be chosen. However, the triple fortune wheel has 2 additional twists on it. The person doesn't place 1 bet, but they place 3. As the ball rolls down the first spinning wheel, it then falls into a slot marked by the grouper. As the ball then falls into the wheel below, they begin to spin again, falling into a different number before again falling down into the final wheel below. Each wheel has 38 numbers, 36 possible bets to be chosen per wheel by placing 3 different guesses on the numbers. You had to accurately predict the numbers 3 separate times. The odds of predicting all 3 numbers correctly: 1 out of 46,656. Most casinos also allowed for bets between a sequence of numbers, and some even allowed for bets of whether it would land on red or black. Fair Verona was not nearly so fair. It was only on numbers and the odds, on what I did or didn't get correct, that would dictate what I did win. "These are very long odds. Are you sure you want to do this?" Summer asked me as I nodded. "I don't have to win everything. I just have to win at least 1. 1 to 36 odds will still pay out enough gray chips for all of us to head to the Morris's mine. As long as I choose 1 correct number, I have 3 chances," I told Summer, who shook her head. Yeah, 1 to 36 chance to win is just another way of saying 35 to 36 chance to lose. That's not how statistics works. That is exactly how statistics work. Your odds of success are just your odds of success. There isn't a chance of a draw, nor a chance of a partial success. You either win or you lose. The other games will take longer, but they will be safer with smaller wagers. Summer implored me before I put my 2 chips down on the table in front of me, all of the chips that I had left. Please don't, she said to me as I made my selections on the tablet in front of me. 3 different panels with 3 different sets of numbers. So I chose my lucky numbers that itched in the back of my head. I had no real reason to choose these numbers, but I still had them. 13 on the first wheel, 17 on the second wheel, and 5 on the final wheel. Oh, yeah, that was another factor in the triple fortune wheel. So you could choose the right number, but if you chose the wrong wheel, you will still lose. Oh yeah, that greatly reduces my odds even more. I probably should have considered that. The wheel spun, and I noticed that the angel dealer, who just left their job dealing at the pontoon, was sitting at a completely different chair at the same fortune wheel, gambling their gray chip at the same table I was. This wasn't right. I gave them their freedom. They're supposed to be free. Break away and fly away from the casino. Why did they choose to keep gambling? Maybe there's some trick or reason I don't understand? I don't get it. I thought only humans get greedy, that only humans made bad decisions. Well, if they want to gamble against me now, I hope they still win something. The ball began to spin on the highest wheel, just at the same height as my eye, as it spun against the wheel, both spinning in opposite directions. It spun and spun as the grouper watched, and we all watched. The ball finally fell down the first hole. 13. I already got a win. That would be 72 gray chips for me, more than enough to get everyone into the Morris's mine. The ball kept spinning on the wheel below. Before, I didn't need it to fall through any other holes. It would be enough for me as it is now. Although, I still wanted to see if I was going to win anything more. The next hole it plunged through was 17. My winnings increased even further. 2,592 gray chips were now mine. If I was inside a casino in the Seven Cities, I would have been a billionaire worth over 259 billion centi, one of the wealthiest individuals in the history of humanity. And there was still one more wheel to see. There was no way I could possibly win this one as well. Still, I was on the edge of my seat as I saw the ball spin over the final wheel. Over and over it spun, and then finally it fell through the final hole. 5. I won. I didn't just win, I won all 3 wheels. My initial gamble of 2 gray chips became 93,312 chips. Out in the Seven Cities, that's over 9 trillion centi. Everyone's eyes were staring at me as the Crooper collected the chips and my winnings were counted out. If you please step aside with me. These are a lot of winnings, and we want to make sure that they're given to you safely, the Crooper said as he guided me away from the casino floor and from my sister. I followed eagerly. That many chips? I was going to have no trouble with any other challenge, and the others will definitely see me as their best player. I was guided into a quiet part of the casino, where the Crooper opened a door and pointed me inside. The owner is just inside. I'm sure he will explain everything to you, the Crooper said as I walked into the dark room. Inside, the door shutting and locked behind me. Despite the situation, I was certain I was safe. Dangerous things only ever happened to other people. All of those cautionary warnings only ever happened to other people, to people who were dumb enough to let those things happen to them. I was too smart for something like this to ever happen to me, so therefore it would never happen to me. A single light fixture turned on. Underneath the light was a very tall man. His eyes were shiny as can be, his hair was slicked back, his collar stood up straight, and it was as red as can be. He had a bushy mustache underneath his nose. Directly behind him was a mirror. The mirror was large enough that I could see that the only figure in the reflection was myself. The overboss of Vanderburg, Mr. Pyre, cast no reflection. "Hello, Mr. Pyre. Pleased to meet you. I am Autumn Abigail Argentum. I'm sure you've heard all about me," I said, extending my left hand towards him, as he only rudely stared back at me. "Ah, yes, the little red-handed murderer who won at the fortune wheel. Did you really think that Fair Verona is the kind of place where we let murderers go free without any punishment?" he asked as he leaned over me. His eye teeth were very sharp and prominent, even through his closed mouth. He kept staring at me as if he was expecting me to answer. "I'm not a murderer. I've not killed anyone," I said indignantly. "I don't know why anyone would think of me as a murderer. I'm not a bad person. I've not even done anything bad at all during my entire time inside the pumpkin house." Mr. Pyre stared at me for a moment before he grabbed my left hand and lifted the hand to my face. The blood from the dishonest handshake of Dealer Jack still stained my hand, and it was still red. "You're red-handed. You haven't even tried to wash the blood off your hands. The very blood on your hands stained the cards and the chips that you play with. If I give you those chips you won, then the blood would have soaked every single chip inside of the casino. I should take your winnings and leave you to die out in Vanderburg," he said as he leaned back, letting go of my arm and making a steeped temple with his hands. "However, I believe in second chances, so I will give you a chance to prove that you aren't a murderer. You said that you're an Argentum, as in the Sunset Republic Argentums?" he asked, and I nodded. If he knew my family, then surely he would know that I am a trustworthy person. "Well, all you have to do to prove that you're an Argentum. Surely, such a powerful Fey family would produce only powerful children. So these tests will be easy for a Fey like yourself," he said as my heart pounded in my ribs like a bird trying to escape a cage. Yes, I was an Argentum, but I wasn't a Fey. I was the only Argentum who wasn't a Fey, so any test of Fey abilities weren't going to work on me. But what other choice did I have? I had to prove myself not a killer. "Fine, but if I succeed, you let both myself and my friend into Morris's mines," I told Mr. Pyre, who only chuckled. "That's fine. But just know this. If you do not succeed, you will be treated as any other murderer, tossed out of Fair Verona, and you will never be allowed to return," he said with a chuckle as the door behind me unlocked. I hope you enjoy it, but just so you know, we don't do things part way in this casino. This test will be a lovely show for everyone in the casino. So, your friends will get to watch you show everyone how wonderful you are. A simple show, but everyone loves to watch a royal show us presents up, Mr. Pyre said with a smile that was equal parts challenging and cruel. I will show you what an Argentum can do, I said as Mr. Pyre led me to the stage in the casino's theater. As he led me ahead, two guards followed behind me, giving me nowhere to run as I was led to the theater. The theater seats were all full. In the front seats, I could see my friends. They all were beaming up at me with pride. On the stage was a table with two candles on it. Mr. Pyre stood in the center of the stage as he spoke to everyone. Welcome, everyone, to the great magic show. We have the amazing Autumn Abigail Argentum of the Sunset Argentums, a powerful Fae family with not a single weakness in their entire extended family. She has been accused of being a murderer, but she will convince us that she isn't a murderer by proving that she is an Argentum. So please welcome the amazing Autumn, Mr. Pyre said as he pointed towards my direction, and I walked on stage, waving to the audience with confidence, imagining an invisible string pulling my spine up straight through my head as I made my way to the table, waving to the cheering audience. I enjoyed the cheers, and for a moment I forgot the danger that I was in. I forgot that I was being tested. At that moment, I just was happy to be acknowledged, to be cheered, that my friends were all cheering me on and believing in me. I was an Argentum, and any obstacle would fall before me, and those cheers brought a genuine smile to my face as Mr. Pyre raised his hand and silence fell across the audience. I know, I know. How can you possibly have a test of magic without having someone to test your magic against? Sadly, there is no one in the pumpkin house anywhere near Argentum's level, so I beg your forgiveness, Abigail, but you will have to deal with the Magician of the Arcana, the first trump card of cartomancy, the heart and soul of the pumpkin house, one who goes by many names, the magus, the juggler, the artisan. However, most of us in Fair Verona simply know him as the magician Il Bagatello Rider, he said as a cloud of smoke appeared in the middle of the stage, and from inside of the smoke stood Ryder. He wore a single circlet of white gold on his head. He also wore white robes and a red duster over it. He held a candle aloft in his right hand, and his left hand with 6 fingers pointed below. When he appeared, the cheers and clapping were far louder than it was for me. Here I was, facing the magician of the Arcana. Even if I was magical, this would be a tough test. And now, it was one of those moments where you already know you've lost, but you're going to do everything you can to try and make it a tough win. Now, for our first test, both of our performers just have to light the candle in front of them. As you can all see, the candles are here. They may both use any tool in front of them, Mr. Pyre said, pointing to both tall candles in front of both the magician and myself. There were matches lighters, and even a flint and steel in front of me. But the magician had a simple test. All he did was lower his candle to the wick of the candle, lighting the candle in front of him. No magic required. This test was practically insulting as I picked up the lighter and I lit it in front of everyone. The flame was visible to everyone as I lowered it to the wick of my candle. Except the wick wouldn't light. It would start to blacken and smolder, but it wouldn't light. What is the matter, Argentum? Is your candle not lighting? Maybe try your magic to light it, Mr. Pyre said to the laughing audience as I lowered the lighter to try and use the match to light it. The match lit easily as I lowered it to the wick, only for it to not light still. Every match I brought close to the candle went out before it could even try to light at the wick. Oh, looks like you had a bad lighter and an entire book of bad matches. Well, that only leaves you two options. You can use the flint and steel, or you can use your magic, Abigail, Mr. Pyre said as I lifted the flint and steel, and I struck it over and over, trying to get the sparks to reach the wick. Sometimes they would reach the wick, but it still wouldn't light. But I did notice something interesting. My candle was melting, and it was in fact melting faster than the flame from Ryder. Now was the time for being clever. If I wasn't clever, then I would have to admit loss. I have lit this candle with a flame that cannot be seen nor felt. However, you know it is there because, as you can see, my candle melts, and in fact, melts faster than Mr. Ryder's, I said, pointing towards my melting candle, and Mr. Pyre narrowed his eyes. But before he could say anything, the room erupted into cheers and collapse. Far more cheers for my little trick than for the magician lighting his candle. And as the cheers rang through the theater, Mr. Pyre swallowed his comment, for he clapped me on the back. Exactly something I should have expected from an Argentum of your caliber. Now, let us do something a little flashier, a little more spectacular, Mr. Pyre said with barely concealed malice. But I barely noticed as I let the applause and cheers wash over me. That was the trick to this challenge. I don't have to be better than the magician. I don't even need to fool Mr. Pyre into thinking I was better. I just had to convince the audience that I was better. That was already halfway done for me. He told the audience who I was, and already people want to see me succeed. For our next trick, we need you to do a simple test of strength. To avoid breaking anything important, we will start with soft materials. Let's say balsa wood, Mr. Pyre said as two assistants dressed in beautiful sequins and feathers brought out two planks of balsa wood. One was given to the magician, and the other was given to me. It smelled like what I thought balsa wood would smell like. It was cold and smooth to the touch as I felt the material, as Mr. Pyre yelled for us to break our wood. Mr. Ryder snapped his plank easily, and the next plank brought out was made out of oak, as Mr. Ryder also prepared to snap it. I tried to snap the balsa wood in my hand. It did not break. It did not bend. My hands stung as I struggled to snap it, to break it or even to get it to bend just a little. And yet the balsa wood was unfazed. There was a gasp in the audience as they saw me struggle to break the weak wood. I tried breaking it over my knee, only for my knee to sting, and I almost bent over in pain. While I struggled to snap the balsa wood, Mr. Ryder moved on to iron bars that bent in his hands like they were made out of rubber. His strength was clearly much greater than my own. "You can't even break balsa wood? I thought that argentums are strong," Mr. Pyre said as I tried to break it with my foot and pulled it up with my hand. And still Mr. Ryder stood there, silently, judging me, unable to break the wooden board, while the audience whispered, and then as they whispered, they began to boo at me. It started with just a few in the back, but as it spread, soon it felt like the entire audience was booing at me. When I saw my friends in the front of the row, they weren't booing at me, but I could see disappointment in the eyes of my sister. When I saw that disappointment, something in me broke as I let go of the balsa wood and it shattered on the stage. "Well, you finally broke the balsa wood. Let's see if you can break some tougher materials," Mr. Pyre said as an oak board was brought out. The audience still booed at me as I picked up the board and snapped it between two fingers on my left hand. I barely noticed as an iron bar was brought out. Where Mr. Ryder made the iron bar bend, the bar shattered into iron dust as I dropped it onto the stage. The boos from the audience continued. "Although you both have proven yourselves quite strong, I'm afraid Mr. Ryder did them all first, so I will have to give the win to him. Don't worry, there is another chance for you to prove yourself a true Argentum. You've proven your mastery over fire and strength. Now our final test is a simple one. You will have to hit a target with a knife. Surely a simple test for one as accomplished as yourself," Mr. Pyre said as there were two targets brought onto the stage. The magician stood on one side of the stage as he waited for me to start. The boos in the audience stopped as I nodded and I stood next to the magician. I blinked away my tears as I tried to focus on this test. This was my final test. I had to focus on hitting the target. Everything was dependent on me winning this. "All you need to do is stay calm and accept what is happening, and you got this," Mr. Ryder whispered to me as I shook off the advice. I couldn't focus on my failures. I had to ignore my failures. I had to get past this. I was the greatest. I am Autumn Abigail Argentum. I am always one of the best by default, getting the best grades in class, being the best at sports. I was always the most popular. I was strong. I was powerful. I had to focus on being powerful if I was going to win this. Mr. Ryder threw his first knight. It hit the target, but it was fairly far from the center of the target. He nodded as the audience did some partway applause, as it was now my turn to throw the knife. I had thrown knives for school, and as a hobby, it wasn't even the hardest target I faced. So I held the knife by the blade as I pulled my hand back and I flung my arm forward, letting my wrist flick while my elbow locked. The knife flung forward, but the target must have been a lot farther than I thought. The knife didn't even make it a quarter across the stage before it fell to the ground. "Well, That was a great throw if your target was the stage. Next time, Abigail, aim for the target. Who knows, if you actually aim for the target, you might get closer to it, Mr. Pyre said unhelpfully to an audience that laughed at his words. I could even see Summer covering her mouth at the joke. She was trying not to laugh, but you could tell she was laughing with everyone else. My cheeks flushed as the magician lined up his next throw. He got slightly closer on the target, but he was still far from the brilliant center of the target. I don't know how he managed to do it, but he got a much better score than I did before. Now I had to try and focus on getting closer to the target. I took a deep breath and I pulled my arm back. My muscles tensed as I put all of my strength into the throw. I aimed a lot higher as I threw the knife across the stage. And still, the knife didn't even make it halfway across the stage. It slid across the floor and came to a stop when Mr. Pyre stepped on the blade, causing it to stop moving forward. Well now, stabbing me won't fix anything. But don't worry, you have one last chance, he said as the audience was silent, while the magician lined up his next shot. He threw with all of his might, and still, the knife barely hit the outer edge of the target. Even the magician struggled with this test, although it was my last throw, my last chance. There was no way I was going to win. I wasn't good enough to beat an arcana like the magician. He was a being so powerful that he didn't die. He only reincarnated. Immune to judgment, he laughs at petty things like time, entropy, and death. A power so great it would take a cartomancer to control or even use his power. I was no one. I was a normal human, a nobody that was taken in by a powerful family without their knowledge. A parasitic bird. That was what I was to the Argentums, and that was what I was here. Nothing special about me, and I was going to prove it to everyone. I didn't even bother trying with my final throw. I lifted my hand and flung it forward and let the blade go. I didn't even expect to get a meter ahead of myself. Instead, the blade flew straight and true. It flew with power I definitely did not throw into it, and it hit the center of the target. Not quite the exact center, but far closer than any of the magician's throws. I glanced towards the magician, and for the first time he made eye contact with me. "Hai su Teknen?" the magician asked me in Argivian, while I shook my head, indicating I had no knowledge of that old language, before he switched to Ingovanek. "Fel Quen," he said, like telling me "then fall queen" meant anything to me. I am certain it had something to do with that old Albion playwright that Kel was going on about earlier. But if he was going to make a reference to me, he should have used a reference I would understand. He bowed deeply, and there was applause in the audience, before suddenly there was silence. Not silence like the crowd stopped, silence like the television was muted all at once. I turned to the audience, and the theater was empty, leaving only my friends in the front row, who looked around, not sure where everyone else went. Now it was just the magician and myself on the stage. No props nor anything. Just me and the arcana. Somehow being alone with the magician made things far, far more intimidating than being alone with Mr. Pyre. "Well, Abigail," I'm certain that you must know what the tests were now. They were illusions meant to be impossible to pass? I asked the magician, who nodded with a chuckle. Indeed, someone has been brushing up on their Ostman more. Everyone and every test in the theater has been a trick. The candle you tried to light, he produced the two candles from his sleeves, and I could see that they weren't white wax like I thought. They were transparent and very cold. I could feel the cold from them as he held the candle close to my face before he pulled them away, having them drop to the floor, breaking into many pieces. The candles were made of ice. You cannot burn ice. Burning water may be possible, but certainly not ice. However, I was impressed by your ability to trick the audience into believing that melting ice was melting wax, and that you lit an invisible flame, the magician said. But if the audience was an illusion, then I didn't fool anyone, I told the magician, who lifted a single index finger, wagging it at me like I made a mistake. Not everyone in the audience was an illusion. You convinced your friends, and that was more than enough for me. A small audience is still an audience. Although I do admit the boos were all me. Your friends never stopped cheering you on, although I did have to cover that up for your next tests. Can you guess what it was that you were breaking on the stage? He asked, and I thought about it for a minute. When I was confident and I was willing to do anything to break it, the material was unbreakable, and yet when I put hardly any effort into it, it shattered easily. What kind of material gets stronger when you use more force, but it gets weaker when you use less force? I can only think of one thing. Was it myself? Was I trying to break myself on stage in front of everyone? I asked the magician, who stared at me for a moment before he laughed. Yourself? Well, not quite. You have the right idea. It is a bit more conceptual than that. A bit more inside of yourself than yourself. So I will give you a hint. The strongest beings on Earth would struggle to break these blocks, unable to even crack it the slightest, while the weakest beings would break these blocks just by breathing on it, the magician said as I thought about it a bit more. What does a strong person possess that's stronger than their strength? What does a weak person possess that's weaker than their weakness? I twisted the terms in my mind, trying to think conceptually. Still, unlike Kel and Marceline, I don't think conceptually very often. Pataphysics only gave me a headache, so I stuck with regular metaphysics. Is it their confidence? I asked, and the magician chuckled. So close. Someone who is powerful and knows they're powerful will have a lot of pride in themselves. While having a lot of pride doesn't necessarily make someone strong, it does make their pride stronger than themselves. Someone who knows their own weakness, who possesses good humility, will be stronger than their own pride. So, I had to have the audience boo you, cause you to weaken your pride, until it was weaker than yourself. You will face many obstacles, Autumn. However, your pride will hold you back far more than your anxieties. Knowing that you are stronger than your pride will help you push yourself to new heights. However, you will need to master pride before you let it push you where you cannot escape. The magician warned, and I nodded, thinking I finally understood. I was so confident and so proud, and when it vanished, even when I broke those unbreakable items, there was no warmth in my heart. There was no warm and fuzzy feeling from winning. I barely acknowledged it, and I know deep in my heart I don't want to ever feel that way again. I will need to be stronger than my pride, but I will not let my pride go. Not completely. And for your final test, we both faced the same obstacle. That target is something very few people will ever achieve. Weak, strong, wise, idiotic, magical, mundane, exoteric, or esoteric. Very few make that target. However, if you think about it, I am sure you know what that target was. Even though you didn't hit it perfectly, you got far closer than I, and trust me, that is a far greater achievement than anything you've won in this casino, he said as I thought about it for a moment. It was like the pride challenge, but it wasn't pride holding me back. I lost most of it in the challenge before. It was definitely inside me. I stopped thinking of myself as an Argentum. I thought of myself as just another human, just another cautionary warning in the fairy tales, just another fool who's way over her head, someone who thought she had everything figured out, only to be outsmarted at every turn. It wasn't feeling bad that did it. If it was, then I would have hit the target on the first try. I started seeing my mistakes, and I realized that they were mistakes. I was no longer justifying my actions. I realized that I hurt Kel, Falling Grace, and even Marceline and Dylan, who practically felt like they were made of granite. I was acknowledging my mistakes. There was a word for it. It took me far longer to come up with the word than I cared to admit. I was raised to always think of it in negative terms. Only weak people admitted mistakes. Only kiss asses said they were sorry. Only losers knew defeat. Only failures failed. And only humans needed to learn their place. Finally, the correct word came to mind. A word that was so rarely used, and the context was always negative, that I didn't think it would ever be used in something like this. Acceptance. The targets were acceptance of my limits. I asked the magician, who nodded and smiled. A genuine smile, not a smile of performance. Indeed, acceptance is something that is very difficult for people to acknowledge, let alone ever learn. It's easy to keep hearing about constant growth, constant strength, constant change. It is far harder to accept things as they are. You certainly won't need to all the time, but as you saw, even I struggle with accepting things the way they are. When you're born into power, it's far easier to say that you just change whatever you want. Accepting who you are, your limits, and your humanity, well, congratulations, Autumns. You and your friends deserve to head into Morris's mine, the magician said as the curtain in the back lifted, revealing a steel door. Although I think you will have a lot to tell your friends, he said as he walked off the stage into the darkness. After an awkward few seconds of pulling everyone onto the stage, we made our way to the door, but before it opened, I opened my mouth. I want to apologize for how I was acting tonight. I wanted to carry the team. I thought that if I was right, we would have fun, that we would get through easily, but I have been wrong so many times. And I think, no, I know that I have said things that have hurt you all. I am sorry. None of you deserve to be treated that way. I will do what I can to step back and let things happen. However, I know that I will have struggles, times where I make bad choices, times where I feel so conflicted I don't know what is or isn't the right choice, times where I say something far harsher than what is needed, times where I believe I know best, times where I cannot let go of my pride long enough to listen. But I will also do everything I can to make sure that I will learn and that I will listen, that I will loosen my pride. I will let go of some of the invisible strings in my mind holding me to impossible standards. I will do everything I can to untie these impossible invisible strings from those around me, from the people, the situations, the circumstances, and from myself. I know it is hard to accept what I am doing as genuine when I have made many mistakes, but I will earn your trust the long way by showing you that I care about and love you all. As proud as I am, as bound as I am, as rigid as I am, and as callous as I am, I do care and love you all far more than you know. So, I hope we can make the best out of the rest of our night, I said as the others nodded. Apology accepted, Bell said with his trademark smile. I am certain we will have a good night, Marceline said, her eyes bright with the fires within. Sure, I accept it. Just be more careful next time, Dylan said as Summer just nodded. No words needed to be said. Fallen Grace was the hardest. I acknowledge your apology. However, I do not accept it at this time. If and only if I see changed behavior, I will accept your apology then. This time, your apology is acknowledged. However, I am not accepting it. So you will have to live with that guilt. For now, she said. I nodded and I caught a reflection of myself in the metal door. Yeah, I understand what you mean, I told her as I knew that I didn't accept the apology of the girl in the mirror. Not yet, at least. However, I still had a feeling that there would be a day where I could look in the mirror and I would see myself as I am, not as a failed copy of my sister. Let's see what's in Morris's mind, Summer said as she twisted the doorknob, and she opened it, revealing the industrial darkness inside.